Upgrades.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another JVS movie review. Today, I'm bringing you a film that is about 18 years in the making, and that is 28 Years Later. And here's a quick synopsis. A group of survivors live on a small island connected to the mainland by a heavily guarded causeway. When one of them decides to venture into the dark heart of the mainland, he soon discovers a mutation that has spread to not only the infected, but to other survivors as well. And this one is directed, again, Danny Boyle, this is his series here. And it stars Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ray Fiennes, Jack O'Connor, and Alfie Williams, who is the star of this film, is Alfie Williams. So, if you are unfamiliar with 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, and then you jump into 28 Years Later, I think you will be thrown off by the quirkiness that is Danny Boyle. 28 Years Later fully embraces everything that Danny Boyle is as a director, especially when it pertains to this series here. As we get back to Fast Zombies, which I want to say 28 Days Later kind of revolutionizes the zombie genre by making their zombies extremely fast. And we get a mixture of both in this film. Slow zombies, fast zombies, alpha zombies. We get everything in this movie here. What we do not get in this movie is any thrilling moments. There are no thrills in this movie here for 28 Days Later. There was no point in time where I felt suspense at all in this film. This film uses the established franchise that everybody loves in the 28 Days Later franchise to give you a grief-stricken coming-of-age story. As we're introduced to Alfie's character and him with Aaron Taylor Johnson as he goes out to take his son on his first hunt to the mainland. That's what the film builds up at the beginning, is a hunt to the mainland and what that means to these characters here. And it's just, at this point, we get to the coming of age part of the story here. Of this is a rite of passage for him to take his son on this adventure, you can call it, to the mainland. And everything that encompasses as we get on this adventure to the mainland. Once we get there, once we get to the reintroduction of the full horde of what these zombies are, I think that's when you realize this is not the film that you think you're going to sit through. Now, there is a brief moment in the first 7 minutes of this film where these zombies go crazy on a small town, and it is some very violent things happening to women and children in that aspect. Not fully shown, but we know it's happening. But even with that, even with the action on the mainland, I think about 30 minutes into the film, you kind of understand that this is not your typical zombie film. This is going to be a film that has way more to do about the human impact and emotion of this virus than it ever has to do with like giving you thrilling moments that's going to make you jump. I think this 28 Years Later is a great reintroduction for people who possibly, because we've gotten a lot of content with zombies since 28 Weeks Later, I think it's a chance that people have forgotten what the 28 Days Weeks franchise meant to the zombie genre and the story that it was attempting to tell and introduce, and in a different aspect of what you had become accustomed to as it pertains to zombies. So when you get to 28 years later, you get the exact same thing. This is a different type of film. So if you are going into it expecting this big horror zombie bloodfest, I think you're going to be thoroughly disappointed. But if you look at this in the vein of the last Planet of the Apes movie, where it's way more of a coming of age story than it is necessarily what's presented on the outside, I think you could be thoroughly enjoyed with 28 Years Later. Like Alfie Williams, who is the young star in this film, is amazing to watch on screen. Granted, some of the decisions this character makes are absolutely silly. Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt, silly. But even through the silliness of the decisions, you kind of can excuse it because it's an amazing purpose for what those decisions are. And Aaron Taylor Johnson, again, even when it's a movie like Craven, his magnetism on screen just shines through. And it shines through here as we see him as the doting father, the doting husband, as he's attempting to show his son what the real world is. He's great in a very limited scenes that we get him in here. But it's Alfie who has to carry the majority of this film. And his earnestness in his performance really helps you out with this film, as I don't think it's going to be for a lot of people enough zombies in this film. At one point in time, the zombies feel like putties and they just feel like they're just being killed off with absolute ease. But I think the introduction of alpha zombies, the introduction of other elements of zombies that we get in 28 years later, I think those elements are what's going to keep you intrigued into the film. Granted, again, there's no suspense, no thrills. This is not a horror film. For everyone who thinks this is a horror film, this is not a horror film. There are not horror moments in this movie here. Again, this movie could have been directed by Steven Spielberg the way it goes. But again, if you are accustomed or a fan of Danny Boyle, you should have known from the beginning exactly what film you were going to get here. And because I am a fan of Danny Boyle, and I kind of could guess exactly what he would want to show the world, you get exactly that with 28 years later. While not great, it is still a really good coming of age story. And I think that is what the main purpose of 28 years later was here, with some crazy performances. But 28 years later, which comes out this Friday, out of a possible 10, I am going to give 28 years later a 6.5 out of 10. Still enjoyable. This is an enjoyable film. You kind of want more zombies in it. You want the third act to be much stronger than it is. And you just want some things that make more sense. Like, it really felt at times, and I know this is a horrible comparison, especially for this show. It felt at times like I was watching another episode of Last of Us. That's what it felt like. With the isolation, with the town, and all these other elements in it that have very much became prominent because of Last of Us. That's what 28 years later feels like at times. A rehash of that. And if it wasn't for young Miss Alfie Williams, I think it could have went down a deep area of being that. But his performance in this film is so good that you forget at times you're watching a movie that has zombies in it, and not just watching a kid doing whatever he can to make his family survive while he's trying to survive. And all of this while he's coming of age and becoming the man who he needs to be. That's what you're here for. With 28 years later, is that storyline. And as long as, again, you go in understanding that and not expecting this big zombie festival film, I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. If you are expecting a big zombie fest, if you're expecting a big horror type of film, or those elements of horror in the type of film, this is not for you. Skip it. You're going to be thoroughly disappointed. But also, that's possibly a sign, too, that you have not seen 28 Days for 28 weeks in years. So I would say watch those films first, because it will prepare you for exactly what you're going to get out of 28 years later. If you try to go in it cold and you can't remember those other two films, I think you'll leave thoroughly disappointed. But check it out. It comes out this Friday again. Let us know what you think. This has been the JVS movie review. Peace, people.